They thought I would just stand there and take it, like I always had, like I always would. But what my family didn't know, what they never bothered to ask, was that I had been planning my escape for months. And the day they tried to move my sister into my apartment was the day I finally pulled the trigger on the most calculated disappearing act of my life. My name is Jessica Martinez. I'm 29, a financial analyst at Goldman & Associates in downtown Phoenix, Arizona. I drive a reliable Honda Civic, live in what was supposed to be a quiet neighborhood, and I've built everything I have from scratch. No trust fund, no family money, no shortcuts. Just me, my spreadsheets, and a work ethic that would make my grandfather proud, if he were still alive to see it. But here's the thing about being the successful one in a family full of beautiful disasters. Success becomes your prison. Every achievement, every promotion, every dollar in your savings account becomes ammunition they use against you. You're so lucky, Jess. You're so stable. You can afford to help. My older sister Madison is 31, but acts like she's still 16. She's the kind of person who can make bankruptcy look like a personal tragedy and somehow convince everyone else it's their responsibility to fix it. Lost another job? Her boss was threatened by strong women. Evicted again? Her landlord was clearly unstable. Another credit card maxed out. The system is designed to keep people down. And my parents, Linda and Roberto Martinez, they eat it up every single time. They've been enabling Madison since she was old enough to bat her eyelashes and say, please. They see her as fragile, artistic, misunderstood. They see me as the machine that fixes things. You know what I realized at 3 a.m. one Tuesday, sitting in my kitchen with a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago? I realized I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was their insurance policy, their backup plan. Their emotional and financial safety net that they could rely on to catch Madison every single time she jumped off another cliff. That's when I started making my plan. Call to action placement. But before I tell you exactly what I did and how, I disappeared right under their noses. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel because what happens next is going to shock you. Hit that notification bell too. Trust me, you don't want to miss the ending of this story. The Sunday dinner that changed everything happened 3 weeks after I'd already set my plan in motion. Same routine as always. Mom's enchiladas, Dad's nervous small talk, Madison scrolling through her phone like the rest of us were background noise in her personal drama. But this time, I could feel it. That electric tension that meant they were about to ask me for something big. Mom was being too sweet, Dad was drinking too much beer, and Madison kept shooting me these guilty glances when she thought I wasn't looking. It was Mom who finally dropped the bomb right after she cleared away the dinner plates. "Jessica, honey," she said, in that sugar-coated voice she uses when she wants something. "We've been talking, and we think it would be really good for Madison if she stayed with you for a while, just until she gets back on her feet." Not a request, not a question, a decision they'd made without me. Again. I looked around the table. Dad was nodding like this was the most reasonable thing in the world. Madison was trying to look grateful, but I could see the smugness underneath. They were all waiting for me to do what I always did. Smile, nod, rearrange my entire life to accommodate their latest crisis. Instead, I said the words that would change everything. Of course. If it helps Madison, I don't see why not. The relief in the room was immediate. Mom actually clapped her hands together. Dad raised his beer bottle like we were toasting. Madison finally made eye contact and gave me what she probably thought was a grateful smile. None of them noticed that I didn't ask when. I didn't ask for how long. I didn't ask about logistics or ground rules or anything a normal person would ask when their sister was about to move in, because I already knew something they didn't. You want to know when I first realized I was the family's designated fixer? I was 23, fresh out of college, working 50-hour weeks at an entry-level position just to make rent on a studio apartment that smelled like the pizza place downstairs. Madison called me crying. She was 25 then, had just been unfairly fired from her job at a boutique. She needed $800 for rent or she'd be homeless. Just this once, she promised. She'd pay me back as soon as she found something new. I ate ramen noodles for 6 weeks to make that money stretch. Madison never paid me back, never even mentioned it again. When I brought it up months later, she looked at me like I was crazy. I thought that was a gift, she said. Family helps family, Jess. That's what normal people do. Normal people. Like I was the weird one for expecting to be paid back. The pattern was set. Madison would crash, I would catch her. Madison would burn bridges, I would build new ones. Madison would create chaos, I would clean it up. At 25, it was her car. She'd bought this ridiculous luxury SUV she couldn't afford, missed payments for 3 months, and then acted shocked when they came to repossess it. Dad called me panicking. She needs a car for work, he said. You know how hard it is for her to find jobs. Can you just co-sign on something small? Something small turned into a $30,000 loan. Madison made exactly 4 payments before she decided the job was beneath her and quit. Guess whose credit score took the hit when she stopped paying? At 26, it was bail money. Madison had gotten into a fight at a bar, defending herself against this crazy woman who was clearly jealous. The arrest record said she threw the first punch and a bottle. The bail was $2,500. I paid it because Dad said it would destroy our family's reputation if word got out. Madison never said thank you. She spent the entire ride home from jail complaining about how uncomfortable the holding cell was and how the other women there were obviously criminals, unlike her. The breaking point came when I was 27. Madison had moved back in with our parents after her latest relationship imploded. She'd been there 6 months, not working, not helping with bills, just sleeping until noon and treating Mom like her personal maid. Dad lost his job. The mortgage was 3 months behind. They were facing foreclosure on the house I grew up in. The house that had been in our family for 15 years. I emptied my savings account. $18,000. Every penny I'd managed to save, gone in one wire transfer. You know what my Christmas present was that year? A mug that said "World's Best Daughter," and a lecture from Mom about how I needed to be more understanding of Madison's artistic temperament. But the moment that broke me, really truly broke something inside me, came 6 months later. Madison had finally gotten another job, this time at a real estate office. I was proud of her. I actually thought maybe she was turning things around. 3 weeks in, she called me sobbing again. She'd been fired, not laid off, not downsized. Fired. For showing up late consistently and spending most of her time on social media instead of working. I need help, she cried into the phone. I can't do this alone anymore. And without thinking, I said what I'd been trained to say. What do you need? Just a couple thousand to hold me over while I look for something else. I promise this time will be different. I hung up on her. For the first time in my life, I hung up on my sister. Within an hour, my phone was ringing. Mom, then Dad, then Madison again. All with the same message. How could I be so cruel? How could I turn my back on family? Madison was really trying this time. I was being selfish. That's when I realized something that changed the entire trajectory of my life. I wasn't the successful daughter. I was the useful daughter. And there's a world of difference between those two things. The night I hung up on Madison, I sat in my apartment, the 1-bedroom place I'd bought with my own money, decorated with my own taste, paid for with my own sweat. And I realized it didn't feel like mine anymore, because it wasn't mine. Not really. Not when any family emergency meant I'd have to mortgage it. Not when every paycheck was already mentally allocated to whatever crisis was coming next. Not when my own home felt like a resource that belonged to everyone but me. That's when I started researching. Not revenge. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't plotting to hurt anyone. I was planning to disappear just enough to breathe. I called a real estate agent the next morning. Margaret Chen, recommended by a coworker. Professional, discreet, the kind of person who didn't ask unnecessary questions. "I want to sell," I told her over coffee at a Starbucks across town. "Quietly." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Quietly? No signs in the yard, no online listings with photos, no open houses. I need this done without attracting attention." She studied me for a long moment. I probably looked crazy, a 27-year-old woman selling a perfectly good condo in secret. But something in my face must have convinced her I wasn't just impulsive. "Cash sale?" she asked, "if possible. I have a few investors who might be interested. It'll be below market value, but it'll be fast and private." 3 weeks later, I signed the papers. The condo sold for $15,000 less than it was worth, but it was gone. Completely, legally, irrevocably gone. Here's the brilliant part. I never told anyone I was selling. Why would I? Nobody had asked where I lived lately. Nobody had asked how I was doing, or if I needed anything, or whether I was happy. The only time my family contacted me was when they needed something. So I let them assume. I let them picture me in that familiar space, in that familiar role, waiting patiently for the next crisis to manage. Meanwhile, I was apartment hunting. Not in Scottsdale, where I'd lived before, not even in the same school district. I drove 45 minutes across Phoenix to Tempe, to a complex called Desert Springs Apartments that looked like every other complex built in the 1990s, Unit 2B. Small, clean, anonymous. The kind of place where neighbors minded their own business. And the office staff didn't care why a young professional wanted to pay 6 months' rent up front. I moved in on a Wednesday, took a personal day from work, hired movers I found on Craigslist, and transferred my entire life in 4 hours. The hardest part wasn't the logistics, it was the silence. No one called to ask how the move was going. No one offered to help, carry boxes. No one even noticed I wasn't posting pictures on social media anymore. For the first time in years, I wasn't managing anyone else's crisis. I wasn't fielding phone calls about money or rides or bail or rent. I was just existing in my own space, on my own terms. The apartment was perfect in its imperfection. Beige walls, standard fixtures, a view of the parking lot. But it was mine in a way the condo never had been. Mine because no one else knew where it was. Mine because no one could show up uninvited. Mine because it existed outside the reach of my family's endless emergencies. I spent 3 weeks in that blissful anonymity, going to work, coming home, reading books I actually wanted to read, watching movies without checking my phone every 5 minutes for the next crisis. And then came that Sunday dinner, that casual announcement that Madison would be moving in with me for a little while. I almost laughed. They were making plans for a place that no longer existed, assuming access to a life I'd already left behind. But instead of laughing, I smiled. I nodded. I said exactly what they expected me to say because I wanted to see what would happen when they tried to execute a plan built on assumptions they'd never bothered to verify. Saturday morning came with the kind of Arizona sunshine that makes everything look possible. I woke up early, made coffee in my anonymous kitchen, and checked my phone. 7 messages in the family group chat, loading the truck at 9. Madison's so excited. "Thanks again for helping out, Jess." "See you at noon." I screenshotted every message. Call it documentation, call it evidence, call it insurance. Then I got dressed, grabbed my keys, and drove to a coffee shop 20 minutes away. I ordered a large latte and a blueberry muffin, found a table by the window, and settled in to wait. My phone started buzzing at 12:15. A call from Mom. I let it go to voicemail. Another call 5 minutes later. Another voicemail. By 12:30, Madison was calling. I gave it until 1 p.m. Let them stand there long enough to realize something was wrong, long enough to feel that first flutter of panic when their assumptions crashed into reality. When I finally answered, Mom's voice was sharp with confusion and embarrassment. Jessica, what's going on? We're at your apartment, but there's a man here. He says he lives here now. He says you moved out weeks ago. I took a slow sip of my latte. That's correct. Silence. I could hear Dad's voice in the background, probably trying to explain to Madison why they were standing in a parking lot with all her stuff. What do you mean? That's correct. Mom's voice was climbing toward panic. You said she could move in. I said if it helps Madison, I don't see why not. I never said where. More silence. Then Madison grabbed the phone. Where the hell are we supposed to go? She demanded. I gave notice at my old place. My stuff is packed. You can't just... I can't just what? I asked calmly. I can't just move out of my own apartment. I can't just sell my own property. I can't just make decisions about my own life without consulting the family emergency committee. This is insane, Madison shot back. You're my sister. You're supposed to help me. I am helping you, I said. I'm helping you learn that actions have consequences. I'm helping you understand that other people aren't responsible for your poor planning. I'm helping you realize that maybe, just maybe, you should ask before assuming. I could hear Dad trying to take the phone, probably to play peacemaker like he always did. But Madison held on. So what now? She said. And for the first time, she sounded scared instead of angry. I have nowhere to go. You have the same options you had before you decided I was your backup plan, I replied. Find a place, sign a lease, pay rent, like an adult. With what money? The money you would have spent on rent from my place. You weren't going to charge me rent. And there it was, the assumption that had been lurking underneath all of this. Not only had they expected me to provide housing, they'd expected me to provide it for free. Madison, I said, my voice still calm, still measured. In what universe did you think you could live in someone else's apartment without paying rent? It's different when it's family. No, I said, it's not. I could hear Mom crying in the background. Dad's voice was getting louder, probably building up to one of his lectures about family loyalty and responsibility. Where are you? Mom managed to ask through her tears. I'm safe, I said. I'm in my own home, which I pay for with my own money, making my own decisions about my own life. This isn't over, Madison said, her voice cold now. You can't just abandon your family. I smiled, even though she couldn't see it. I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm just not volunteering to be used anymore. I hung up and turned off my phone, not because I was afraid of what they'd say next, but because I didn't need to hear it. Already knew the script: guilt, accusations, manipulation, threats to never speak to me again. I ordered another latte and pulled out a book I'd been trying to finish for months. For the first time in years, I read without interruption. Sunday brought the social media storm I'd been expecting. Mom's Facebook post went live at 8 a.m., perfectly timed for maximum sympathy from the after-church crowd. Sometimes you think you know your children, but they surprise you in the worst ways. Our daughter Jessica has always been successful, always been fortunate. But yesterday, she showed us a side of herself we never knew existed. She abandoned her sister in her time of need, leaving Madison with nowhere to go after promising to help. We're heartbroken and don't understand how we raise someone who could be so cruel to her own family. The post had been up for 6 hours when my coworker Amanda texted me, "Girl, is your mom okay? She's blowing up Facebook about you." I read through the comments. Aunts I hadn't seen in years calling me selfish. Family friends questioning my character. Strangers who didn't know the whole story making judgments based on Mom's carefully crafted narrative. Here's what's interesting about public shaming. It only works if you're ashamed. And I wasn't. Not anymore. I created my own Facebook post. Not angry, not defensive, just factual. I posted screenshots of every Venmo payment I'd made to Madison over the past 3 years. Every bank transfer to my parents, every bill I'd paid, every emergency I'd funded, every time I'd said yes when I wanted to say no. The thread was long, thorough, devastating in its mundane detail. I ended with this: I didn't abandon my sister. I stopped enabling her. There's a difference, and it's time my family learned what that difference is. The response was immediate and split right down the middle. Half the comments were from people calling me cold and calculating. The other half were from people sharing their own stories about family members who'd taken advantage of their generosity. But the comment that hit me hardest came from my cousin Elena, Dad's sister's daughter, who I'd always admired but barely knew. Jess, I've been watching this family dynamic for years and wondering when you'd finally reach your breaking point. I'm proud of you for setting boundaries. It takes courage to be the bad guy in your family's story when you know you're actually the hero in your own. That comment got 47 likes. Mom's original post got 12. By Monday morning, I had dozens of private messages, some from distant relatives, taking sides, but many from friends and acquaintances sharing their own stories about toxic family dynamics. People who'd been financial safety nets for irresponsible siblings. Adult children who'd been guilted into supporting parents who refused to manage their own money. The most surprising message came from my high school friend Carla, who I hadn't spoken to in years. I remember your family drama from when we were teenagers. Your sister was already pulling this stuff back then, and your parents were already making excuses for her. I always wondered why you put up with it. Good for you for finally saying enough. That message stopped me cold. Other people had been watching this dynamic for over a decade, watching me get used, watching Madison get enabled, watching my parents facilitate it all. I'd thought I was protecting my family's privacy, but apparently their dysfunction had been obvious to everyone except me. Tuesday brought the phone calls, not from Mom or Dad or Madison. They were still in the silent treatment phase, but from extended family members who'd heard different versions of the story and wanted the truth. My Aunt Patricia, Dad's oldest sister, called while I was eating lunch at my desk. I heard about what happened, she said without preamble. Your mother's version and your Facebook version. Want to tell me what really happened? I told her. All of it. The years of bailouts, the assumed obligations, the complete lack of gratitude or accountability from Madison, the way my parents had turned me into their daughter's personal bank and emergency contact. Patricia listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. You know, she finally said, your father was like Madison when we were growing up. Always in trouble, always needing money, always making it everyone else's problem to fix. Your grandmother enabled him for years until she finally cut him off. He was furious at the time, but it's the only reason he learned to handle his own responsibilities. He never told me that. Of course not. People don't like to remember the times they had to grow up the hard way. But maybe Madison needs to learn the same lesson he did. That conversation changed something for me. It wasn't just about setting boundaries anymore. It was about breaking a generational cycle of dysfunction that I'd inherited without realizing it. 3 weeks passed in blessed quiet. I went to work, came home to my anonymous apartment, and lived my life without crisis management or emergency funding or guilt-laden phone calls. It was the most peaceful 3 weeks I'd had in years. Then Madison showed up. I don't know how she found my address. Maybe she hired someone. Maybe she got lucky. Maybe she just drove around Tempe looking for my car. But on a Thursday evening, I came home from grocery shopping to find her sitting on the steps outside my building. She looked different, thinner, tired, less put together than usual. For just a moment, I felt that familiar pang of guilt that had controlled me for so many years. We need to talk, she said, standing up as I approached. I unlocked the building door and held it open. We can talk upstairs. My apartment was exactly what you'd expect from someone who'd downsized from a condo to a rental. Functional, clean, deliberately minimal. Madison looked around with obvious disdain. This is where you've been hiding? She asked. It's so small. It's exactly the right size for one person who pays their own bills, I replied. She sat down on my couch without being invited. Old habits. "Look," she said, "I get it. You're mad. You felt taken advantage of. But this has gone far enough. Mom's been crying every day. Dad won't talk to anyone. The family's falling apart." I poured myself a glass of water and leaned against the kitchen counter. "The family fell apart a long time ago. You're just noticing it now because the person holding it together stopped doing all the work. That's not fair. What's not fair is expecting me to fund your lifestyle choices indefinitely without ever saying thank you." Madison's composure cracked. "I always said thank you." I walked to my desk, pulled out a folder I'd prepared for exactly this conversation. Bank statements, screenshots, receipts. 3 years' worth of financial support documented in black and white. "Show me where," I said, spreading the papers on the coffee table. "Show me one text, one email, one phone call where you thanked me for anything." She stared at the papers without touching them. "I didn't know you were keeping track." "Wasn't. This is just what I could recover from my accounts. The real number is probably twice as high." For the first time in my adult life, Madison was completely speechless. "You want to know what's not fair?" I continued. "What's not fair is that you're 31 years old and you still think other people are responsible for your choices. What's not fair is that Mom and Dad are so afraid of your emotions that they'd rather sacrifice my well-being than deal with your reality. What's not fair is that I spent 6 years being the family ATM and nobody ever asked if I was okay." Madison's eyes filled with tears. Not the manipulative tears I was used to, but real ones, scared ones. "I don't know how to do this alone," she whispered, and there it was. The truth we'd all been dancing around for years. Madison wasn't lazy or selfish or malicious. She was terrified. Completely, paralyzingly terrified of being responsible for herself. "Then learn," I said, but my voice was gentler now. "The same way I did, the same way everyone else does. One mistake at a time, one lesson at a time, one bill at a time." "But what if I fail?" "Then you fail, and then you get up and try again. That's what adults do." She looked at me like I'd suggested she learn to fly. "You make it sound so easy." "It's not easy. It's never easy, but it's necessary." Madison stood up, walked to my window, and stared out at the parking lot. "I found a job," she said quietly. "What?" "I found a job. Not a great job, just retail, at Target. But it's full-time, and they have benefits." She turned back to me. "I've been there 2 weeks. I haven't missed a day." I felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but recognition. This was the first time Madison had told me about employment instead of unemployment, about solutions instead of problems. "That's good," I said. "That's really good. I'm staying with Mom and Dad for now, just until I save enough for a deposit somewhere." She paused. "I know you won't help with that, and I'm not asking you to. I'm just telling you so you know I'm not on the street." We stood there in my small living room, sisters who'd spent years speaking different languages, finally finding words that meant the same thing to both of us. "Madison," I said, "I never wanted to hurt you. I just couldn't keep hurting myself to help you." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "I know. I think I always knew." As she prepared to leave, she turned back one more time. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Not just for the money stuff, but for taking you for granted, for assuming you'd always be there to fix things." It wasn't everything. It wasn't years of accountability summed up in a single apology. But it was a beginning. After she left, I sat in my quiet apartment and realized something profound. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter or resentful or hurt. I was just free. Free to love my family without being responsible for them. Free to help when I chose to, not when I was obligated to. Free to be a sister instead of a safety net. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to enable their self-destruction. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do for yourself is walk away from people who only value your usefulness. And sometimes the only way to save a relationship is to end the version of it that was slowly killing you both. My family had to learn to function without me as their emergency contact, and I had to learn to live without the identity I'd built around being indispensable. It wasn't easy for any of us, but it was necessary. The girl who used to say yes to everything, who measured her worth by her willingness to sacrifice, who believed that love meant never having boundaries, she had to disappear. Not because she was bad or wrong, but because she was preventing everyone around her from growing into who they were meant to be. In the end, I didn't abandon my family. I just stopped volunteering to be their victim. Here's my question for you. Have you ever loved someone so much that you enabled their self-destruction? Have you ever been so afraid of conflict that you sacrificed your own well-being to avoid it? What would it look like if you stopped being useful and started being authentic instead? If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to this channel and share your thoughts in the comments. Have you been in a similar situation with your own family? How did you handle it? Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And don't forget to hit that like button if you believe that sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is save yourself first.